What's up guys, welcome back to the official Triton YouTube channel. My name is Connor, and here today in front of me we have two of the most popular rifle platforms. We have the AR15 and the AR10. We're going to break it down and help you figure out which is the best for your needs. But before we get into that, go ahead and scroll down, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. When this channel hits 10,000 subscribers, we're going to be doing a giveaway over on Instagram, so go ahead and give us a follow there as well. And with that out of the way, let's get into these rifles. Kick things off, before we actually get into sort of comparing and contrasting the AR-15 and the AR-10 on a bunch of different categories, I want to just do a little bit of a highlight of each rifle that I used for this comparison. And starting right here with my Ruger American AR-15. Just to start at the back, you can see I do a B5 stock, I've got a B5 grip. Moving up top here, I have a Triton Navigator 1:6 first focal plane LPVO. This is perfect for this sort of setup where I'm doing a little bit of flat range stuff like shooting drills and plinking, but I can also stretch my legs a little bit and do not quite long range shooting, but just stretch out beyond the flat range of less than 100 yards. Moving up front here, I do have a Streamlight flashlight as well as a Holosun laser. And then as I mentioned with the B5 furniture, I've got a B5 angular foregrip up here, as well as a suppressor. It's a must-have for any rifle setup. With that being said, AR-15s are generally more affordable than AR-10s. The ammunition tends to be a little bit more available, and they are absolutely lighter. They are much lighter than an AR-10, both in the ammo and the rifle itself. One last thing I do want to add about this AR-15 is that this is a 5.56 caliber rifle. There's a multitude of different calibers for AR-15s out there. 5.56 is just probably your most common. It's probably what you're going to see if you go into your average gun store in America. You'll probably find a 5.56 caliber AR-15. So that's what I selected to use for this comparison. Now let's take a look at the AR-10. So this AR-10 is the Aero Precision M5, and just to briefly highlight it, just like I did the AR-15, I've got Magpul furniture, Magpul stock, Magpul grip. Moving up front here, I do have an M-LOK handrail, and of course a bipod. An AR-10 is probably going to be a little bit more of a DMR type setup. Of course, I have a suppressor up front. And last but not least, up top, I have a Triton Orion 1:6 first focal plane LPVO, similar to what I have on the AR-15. But again, for this setup, I really wanted to have that ability to increase the magnification, to zoom in, to stretch the legs of this rifle a little bit. And so therefore, I selected a 1:6 LPVO, which also gives the versatility to be able to run some flat range drills with it if I so desire. So a couple points to make on the AR-10. This one here in front of me is a .308 caliber AR-10, which is probably going to be your most common. .308 is a heavier round than 5.56. It's a little bit more expensive, which is going to be a general theme with the AR-10. It is heavier than the AR-15, and the rounds are heavier, and it's generally a little bit more expensive than an AR-15. All right, so now that we've highlighted both rifles, let's do a little bit more of an in-depth compare and contrast and look at the pros and cons of each rifle and see where each one shines in a couple of different categories. So the first category we're going to compare these two rifle platforms in is weight and maneuverability. And right away, the AR-15 is going to take the cake there. It is the lighter rifle, and therefore it's a lot easier to move around. It's a lot easier to run drills on the flat range, or maybe even do a little bit of close quarters combat with. The AR-10, it's quite simply, it's heavier, it's clunkier, it's not as easy to run around with and run drills with. So another thing to add regarding weight and maneuverability is just that everything with an AR-10 is going to be heavier. It's going to take up more space. Whether you're getting in and out of the tree stand, or you're running flat drills on the range and you're considering how heavy your magazines are going to be fully loaded out, everything with the AR-10 is going to be bigger and it's going to be heavier, and therefore it's going to be harder to move around with. Now it might sound like the AR-10 just has no purpose or use because it is so big and so heavy compared to an AR-15, but that's simply not true. when you are posted up in the tree stand, you're not going to notice that the AR10 is big and heavy. You'll notice it when you're running drills, and you're not going to be doing that as much with an AR10 compared to an AR15. So therefore, it's not terrible just because it's heavy. It just has a different purpose than the AR15. Speaking of that purpose, our next category is range and accuracy. So between the AR15 and the AR10, the average Joe is probably not going to be able to shoot a 5.56 AR15 farther than, say, 500 yards. I'm sure there's someone out there that can do it, but I'm just talking about the average Joe or Jane. The AR10 with a .308 caliber bullet can easily push out to 800, 900, 1,000 plus yards. And that brings up a conversation about ballistics, which we're not going to get into here today. That is a whole other topic that we're not going to go in depth on. But the .308 caliber compared to the 5.56 caliber is going to pack a lot more punch. You're not going to have to worry as much about bullet drop. You're not going to have to worry as much about the wind. Overall, the .308 caliber in an AR10 is going to be able to shoot a lot farther and punch a lot harder than an AR15. So speaking of ammunition, that brings us to the next category, which we're going to compare these two rifles on, and that is ammunition cost and availability. And before we get into that though, it's important that you consider what exactly you're going to be doing with your rifle. If you're going to be shooting 1,000 rounds a month, then ammunition cost is really important. But if you're going to be shooting maybe 100 rounds a year when you're hunting, or you're dialing in your scope to go on a hunt, then that's not as big of a deal to you. 5.56 is significantly cheaper and more affordable than .308. But again, if you are not shooting 1,000 rounds every month, that's not a big deal. It's something to consider, but ultimately that is up to you to consider with what you're going to be doing with your rifle. For the next category, which we're going to compare these two rifles, we're going to take a look at aftermarket parts and customizability of each rifle. For the AR15, there's a huge plethora of aftermarket parts out there. There's a lot of customizability options with this rifle. With the AR10, it's a little bit more restrictive. There's not as many parts out there. You do need to factor in whether your AR10 is the DPMS pattern or the Armalite pattern, because those two are not compatible. Just in general with the AR10, there's not a plethora of aftermarket parts out there, and the aftermarket parts that do exist are generally a little bit more expensive than those for an AR15. So one other thing to discuss with aftermarket parts and customizability is the weight of the things you're adding. You can see this AR15 here to my side. It's pretty decked out, it's pretty loaded out, it's got a lot of things on it, and it's still not nearly as heavy as this AR10. And that's something to consider with what you're doing with your rifle. How are you planning to load it out? What are you planning to do exactly when it comes to customizability? Because it's worth considering, how heavy is the thing going to be? Again, if you're running flat range drills, you probably don't want something that's super heavy compared to something you're going to be, say, sitting in a deer stand with, where it's not as big of a deal if it's got a little bit of weight. It's probably more preferable that you have everything tuned in and dialed in so that you can make an ethical shot, you can make a good shot in the deer stand. Okay, so speaking of hunting, that brings us to our next category to compare these two rifles on, which is hunting capability. Now, this is not as much of what you can do with each rifle, but more so what each rifle is best suited for. So for example, the 5.56 caliber AR15 is really well suited to hunt varmints and coyotes and sort of smaller game, while the .308 and the AR10 is really well suited for hunting deer and bear and elk and these bigger game animals. With either situation, whatever you're hunting, it is very important that you check your state and local laws and regulations when it comes to hunting, because here in Virginia, we cannot legally hunt deer with this caliber of rifle. Now, in North Carolina, you can hunt with a 5.56 223 rifle, but regardless, always check your state and local laws and regulations before hunting anything. Now, for our last category, which we're going to compare these two rifles on, we're going to talk about home defense and sort of a tactical use for each of them. With the AR-15, this is an excellent option for home defense. You could really easily build this out and outfit it for close quarters combat and kind of build a sort of bump in the night type of rifle to where you can easily clear a room, you can clear a house with it. So a really good option over here with the AR15 for home defense. Now with the AR10, this kind of comes back to that maneuverability and the heaviness of it and the clunkiness of the rifle. It's not going to be as well suited for that sort of close quarters combat type of operation. Where this would really excel in would be almost like a property defense type of rifle, maybe like a DMR type of setup where you are defending land or maybe making a defense of your property. That would be really a better tactical use for the AR10. Again, it's sort of heavy. You're not going to be having fun running through a house trying to clear your home at night when you hear a bump with the AR10. You'll be a lot happier doing that with an AR15. So now let's bring it all together and talk about which between these two rifles I prefer. Personally, I prefer AR15s, and that's not to say AR10s don't have their purpose. I think they absolutely do, but where I live, I'm not gonna be shooting out to 1,000+ yards. I really value having a lighter weight rifle with more affordable and a whole plethora online of aftermarket parts that I can swap and customize and build this thing out exactly for what I need it to do. Again, AR10s have their role. I think in a perfect world, you would have both. I would love to have both. I would recommend if you're choosing between the two, you go out and shoot both, try both, and figure out exactly what you're gonna be doing and what you need to build out your rifle for. Now, with that being said, with either rifle in any situation you are building your rifle out for, you need an optic. And Triton can provide that optic for any situation. With both of these builds, we put LPVOs on them. We put first focal plane 1 to 6 LPVOs on them. But with the AR10, maybe you want to swap this out for a Triton Hyperion that can really stretch its legs out to 1,000+ yards, where this LPVO might not be able to. Similarly with this flat range rifle, this AR15, you might want to put a 1 to 4 LPVO just because you don't need that extra magnification. Regardless, Triton has the optic for you. All right, so let us know down below in the comments between the AR15 and the AR10, which one do you prefer? Which one do you run? Or maybe you like both. Let us know down in the comments. And with that, thank y'all very much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next one.